Greetings, students. Welcome to Complexity Fuel. My name is Mr. Little, and I'm looking at these three pictures here. Each one depicts an event from the mid to the late 19th century, and events that you should be familiar with if you've gone through Unit 5 and Unit 6 of AP World. That is the establishment of the Taiping Kingdom in China, the Sepoy Revolt in India, and the Ghost Dance movement in the United States. My question is, what do all these movements have in common? Resisting expansion of states in some way, shape, or form, but they did it differently. The Taiping Kingdom was an effort to establish a state. The Sepoy Revolt was direct resistance, and the Ghost Dance movement was a cultural movement. So what do they all have in common? Well, what they all have in common is, to one degree or another, some sort of religious influence. And now, if you're familiar with the College Board AP World description, you need to be familiar with revolts and resistance to state expansion and imperialism that were inspired by religion. But what does that actually mean? Does that just mean that an existing religion makes a call for rebellion, or that religious movements are founded to resist states? There's more to it than that. And what I'm here to do today is to take that idea and make it a bit more complex. When discussing resisting imperial expansion and the expansion of state power between the years 1790 and 1900, specifically Unit 6.3, what do you actually have to know? Well, you have to know that increasing discontent with imperial rule led to rebellions, some of which were inspired by religious ideas. I'd like to say a little bit more about that, because I think religious ideas as a term is a little bit of an oversimplification. Religions have been around for a long time, and why are we just now hearing about their power to inspire revolt? That's because there's a little bit more at play here. And what's at play here is a term for a series of movements that are called Millenarian movements, or Millenarianism. These are movements that are a quest for total, imminent, this-worldly collective salvation. And this is the key thing that distinguishes a millenarian movement from a religion. Religions speak of next-worldly salvation, right? A divine plan for divine salvation, as in, you will be saved and your soul will do better in the next life or in some sort of afterlife. Millenarian movements talk about making this world better. This life is going to be better. Social movements that seek radical, massive change in accord with a predetermined divine plan. And this really does make sense. If you're going to throw in your lot, if you're going to take a risk in resisting state authority or imperial power, you would need to be persuaded that the change is going to be real and the change is going to be in this lifetime. And so it's interesting to note that almost every required example that you need to know for AP World History has millenarian features to it. The Ghost Dance movement in North America, the Mahdist revolts in Sudan, the Boxer Rebellion in China, which we normally sort of just associate with politics, but there was a sort of supernatural divine element to it, as well as the cattle movement in Southern Africa. All of these movements had some sort of plan about changing the social structure as it was in this life. And you can look at the details of each one of those movements. They are inspired by religion, but it's a millenarian form. I want to talk about a few revolts and examples of resistance that you don't normally associate with religious inspiration, but that did have millenarian features. One of those would be the Sepoy Revolt. Now, we normally associate the Sepoy Revolt with the cartridge question and the brutality of British company rule in India. And those were arguably the reasons for the revolt. However, at the time of the revolt, just before it and just after it, were rumors of a prophecy that was then played up by the leader of the Sepoy Revolt, the last Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah, that the British only had 100 years in India. And in 1857, it was exactly 100 years after the Battle of Plassey, in which the East India Company established its foothold in Bengal. So there was a widespread belief that the English would be driven out of India after 100 years. And some people, no doubt, saw the Sepoy Revolt as the fulfillment of that 100-year prophecy. Now, arguably, again, it's important to remember the cartridge question, the question of missionary pressure, the question of abusive taxes. All of these things did contribute to the Sepoy Revolt. This prophecy also contributed to the Sepoy Revolt, and therefore it has millenarian or religious inspiration. There's also Tupac Amaru II's revolt in the Andes, which we normally associate with declining economic health and the social upheaval suffered by the indigenous Incans in the Andes, in Peru and what is now Bolivia. But there was also a prophecy that had become very popular, the Incari prophecy, that was connected to two deceased Incan rulers, Atahualpa, who fought Pizarron. You may know this if you read the famous passage from Guns, Germs, and Steel. Now, Atahualpa was strangled, but his brother actually, after he was strangled, beheaded him and took his head away for safekeeping. There was Tupac Amaru I, who led the continued Incan resistance against the Spanish. He was captured, and he was eventually beheaded. So you have this prophecy about two beheaded Incan kings that essentially said that once the head came back to the body, then the Incan king would return and restore Incan law and Incan society and wipe away Spanish rule. And so there is evidence that Tupac Amaru was perceived by his followers as perhaps fulfilling the Incari prophecy, or his actions might lead to the fulfillment of the Incari prophecy. And the Incari prophecy was not an obscure thing. It was well known, and it was integrated and displayed in Incan society. For example, this is a picture of an anonymous 18th century mural in Cusco that depicts a beheaded Atahualpa underneath a rainbow, which is a common motif in Incan paintings. The image of a beheaded Atahualpa was a reminder of the prophecy that he was awaiting the return of his head, and that this would lead to a rebirth of Incan society and a removal of the Spanish and their influence. Now, while some of these are associated with major revolts against powers, sometimes millenarian movements are just movements for the socially downtrodden, or just one of the most interesting examples is the story of Antonio Conselheiro, who preached in rural Brazil, and he eventually led his followers and founded a new society called Canudos. Side note, Canudos, I believe, is the Portuguese word for straw, but in this case, it was a city that Antonio Conselheiro and his followers founded in northern Brazil. It was, in some ways, a utopian society. It had communal land and communal labor, and they rejected the use of currency, and it was very popular with landless sharecroppers, displaced Indians, former slaves. People flocked to this city, and some of it was religious fervor. Antonio Conselheiro had been a wandering priest during his life, and he was very well respected, and he was very powerful. But some of it was also just economic opportunity. Many people moved there because it was a way to escape from the harsh life of sharecropping or living at the margins of large plantations closer to the coast. Two other notes about millenarian movements that should be noted. One is that millenarian movements are often very syncretic. So, for example, a scholar who's studied the Incari prophecy notes that the Incari prophecy itself is actually a result of colonialism, because if there had been no Spanish colonists to kill Atahualpa or Tupac Amaru and behead them, then the Inca would have just been succeeded by a member of his kin, and there would be no prophecy about him returning someday when his head was returned to him, right? So sometimes it's the pressure of imperialism and colonialism and state expansion that brings about these prophecies. That may not be very surprising when you say it like that, but even that is a kind of syncretism, maybe not the peaceful and happy kind that we always like to talk about with art or language or culture. The other note about millenarian movements, established religions do not tend to like millenarian movements because they see them as a direct political threat, or they might see them as some sort of perversion of their teaching. So, for example, the Mahdists, who sought to bring back the prophet Isa, or to the Christians, Jesus of Nazareth, did not have the support of the ulama or the religious scholars in Sudan. Additionally, the Catholic Church has unequivocally stated that they reject all millenarian movements as deviations from the true teachings of the church. So the term religiously inspired revolts may not be the most appropriate term for some of these movements. So where can you use this information? Well, if you have any essay that discusses resistance to the expansion of the state or resistance to imperial power, the role of religion and imperialism or social change in the age of industrialism or the age of imperialism, if you have an essay on any of these topics, then millenarianism and millenarian movements is a great way to make your essay just a little bit more complex. Hey there. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this video was able to help you. If you appreciate this kind of work, please like and subscribe. And of course, I welcome any kind of feedback or suggestions, so feel free to leave a comment down below. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm Mr. Little, and I'll see you next time.